Une lecture de l'Évangile de Marc. Jésus part avec ses disciples vers les villages voisins de Césarée de Philippe. Sur le chemin, il demande à ses disciples, « Pour les gens, qui suis-je » Les disciples lui répondent, « Les uns disent que tu es Jean-Baptiste, d'autres disent que tu es Élie, d'autres encore disent que tu es l'un des prophètes. » Jésus leur demande, « Mais vous, qui est-ce que vous dites? Qui suis-je » Pierre lui demande, « Tu es le Messie. » Alors Jésus leur commande sévèrement, « Ne dites rien à personne. » Ensuite, Jésus commence à enseigner ceci à ses disciples. « Il faut que le Fils de l'homme souffre beaucoup. Les anciens, les chefs des prêtres et les maîtres de la loi ne voudront pas de lui. Ils le feront mourir, et 3 jours après, il le relèvera de la mort. » Il leur dit cela très clairement. Alors Pierre prend Jésus à part et il se met à faire des reproches. Jésus se retourne et regarde ses disciples et il fait des reproches à Pierre. Il dit, « Viens-t'en, passe derrière moi, Satan. Tu ne penses pas comme Dieu, mais comme les hommes. » Ensuite, Jésus appelle la foule avec ses disciples et leur dit, « Si quelqu'un veut venir avec moi, il doit plus penser à lui-même. Il doit porter sa croix et me suivre. En effet, celui qui veut sauver sa vie la perdra, mais celui qui perdra sa vie à cause de moi et de la bonne nouvelle, il la sauvera. Si une personne gagne toutes les richesses du monde, mais si elle perd sa vie, à quoi lui sert-il? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut payer en échange de la vie? Les gens d'aujourd'hui sont pécheurs et infidèles à Dieu. Si quelqu'un a honte de moi et de mes paroles au milieu de ces gens-là, alors moi, le Fils de l'homme, j'aurai honte de lui quand je viendrai avec les anges saints dans la gloire de mon Père. » Écoutez la parole du Seigneur.
Thank you so much to Chris for his invitation to preach and for all of you for your welcome here this morning. It's good to be back with you. We enjoyed worshiping here during when my husband and I were both on sabbatical last year. My children call this Red Piano Church, and it's always great to be back and worship together with you. We're thankful as well for the welcome into the Verdun, LaSalle, Sud-Ouest Fellowship Group, and we enjoy that time to connect with Christians in our neighborhood. It's an honor to preach this morning at the Sunday of your annual meeting, and it's been really amazing to witness the journey that St. Mark's and St. Peter's have been on over these years, and how you've come together and are moving forward as one community into the future. And the annual meeting is both a time to look back on the journey of the past year and also look forward and pray for God to guide you in your mission in this year ahead. Today is also the second Sunday of Lent, a time when we seek to grow as disciples of Jesus and deepen our relationship with God. And in Lent, we go metaphorically into the desert with Jesus and walk with Jesus towards the way of the cross. And this morning, I'm going to think about what it means to follow Jesus to the cross, and especially what this gospel means about taking up our cross and following Jesus. In our gospel lesson today, Jesus presents a challenging picture of what it means to be one of his disciples. Jesus says, "If anyone to be my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me." This is the first of 3 times in Mark's gospel where Jesus will predict his death and then teach his followers something about what it means to be a disciple. In this passage today, Jesus and his disciples are on the road, traveling in a region that's controlled by Herod Philippi. And this Herod is the brother of the Herod Antipas who has John the Baptist killed. And they're both sons to the Herod in the Christmas story. And Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples give 3 answers. First, they say, John the Baptist, presumably back from the dead, because a few chapters back we'd heard about John being killed. Then they say Elijah, the foremost prophet in the Old Testament. And finally, they say a prophet. And then Jesus asks, well, who do you say that I am? And this is the question which really matters. And I always think of Peter like that really eager student in the class who's like raising their hand before the teacher even asks the question, because Peter is right there with the answer. Peter says, you are the Messiah. And the Messiah was the one the Jewish people had been waiting for and hoping for and praying for centuries. And many believed the Messiah would be a military leader who would lead them to victory over Roman-backed rulers like Herod Philippi and Herod Antipas. And I wonder if that was what was in Peter's mind when he said to Jesus, you are the Messiah. So we can imagine that Peter and the other disciples were shocked when Jesus tells them that the Son of Man will be rejected by the leaders and have to suffer and die. This is not what they expected the Messiah to be. Peter takes Jesus aside and rebukes him, and we don't hear exactly what Peter says to Jesus, but it greatly upsets Jesus. And then Jesus rebukes Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan." These are very strong words. Yet I don't actually think that Jesus is saying that Peter himself is Satan. But there's something in Peter's words that trigger memories in Jesus of his time in the desert. And you may remember that story of Jesus' time in the desert, how Satan visits Jesus during those 40 days between his baptism by John in the Jordan and between when he starts his ministry. Satan tempts Jesus, offering him all the kingdoms of the world if Jesus would only bow down and worship him. And Jesus rejects that temptation then and rejects it again in his conversation with Peter. Then Jesus calls the crowds together and teaches them what it means to be his follower. You must take up your cross and follow me. You must give up your life to save it. Jesus teaches that the life of a disciple is not having power over others. Rather, it is a life of sacrifice, to give of oneself for the sake of others, even at the cost of one's own life. This was a life Jesus modeled as he used his power to heal and feed people, and then gave his life up on the cross. Jesus' instructions are not comfortable words to hear for Jesus' followers or for us today. And as we think about what it might mean for us to take up our cross today, as a church or as individuals, I want to reflect on the cross and on the church's relationship with power. In the first few centuries of the church, Christians in the Roman Empire were sometimes tolerated and sometimes persecuted. Everything changed in 325 when the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. And then in 380, when the Emperor Theodosius made Christianity the state religion and started persecuting people who were not Christians. And this began a long relationship between the church and empire. And this story, of course, carries into our own history here in Quebec, colonized by the French and then the English, missionaries and soldiers arriving together. And this relationship has only changed, as we know, in the past 60 years. And the church has lost its place of privilege and power in society. Being part of a church no longer carries the sort of social weight that it once did. Instead, being a Christian and being part of a church is a choice and also a commitment to seek to grow together as disciples, as followers of Jesus. In the broader Anglican Church, I often hear a longing for the past, for a time when churches were full, when there were more resources and more staff and more activities. I'm sure you never have anything like that happen here. Yet I also wonder if we can look back at the past with rose-colored glasses. For the church of the past had a lot more influence than the church has today. But as we know, it was also a place which worked hand in hand with the government to create and run residential schools. The church of the past was a place where Christians of color were not always welcomed or were not included fully. The church of the past was a place where women's voices were not heard at church meetings or from the pulpit. Our Christian ancestors often took up the cross and used it to bar the way to others, or even as a weapon. We cannot go back to that church of the past. Instead, we are discovering what it means to be the church of the present moment, to be present with those who are looking to encounter Christ now, and to welcome and celebrate our God-given diversity. And perhaps our position, not at the center of society, but at the edge, will help us to hear the gospel more clearly and be in solidarity with those who are marginalized. So in light of that heavy history, what does it mean to take up our cross and follow Jesus? And I think it might mean something different for each of us, depending upon who we are, depending upon our own privilege and place in the world. Those with privilege and power may need to give it up to ease the burdens of others. For those who feel like you've been carrying a cross for a long time, perhaps the invitation is instead to put it down, to rest. For Jesus also says, "Come to me, ye who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus does not ask us to carry more than we can bear, and we are invited to put down our burdens and rest in his presence. Sundays have traditionally been the time set aside to rest and worship God. This is no longer enforced by the culture around us. Rather, we have to choose it, to commit to keeping this time sacred. We come together to worship God and to be fed in community. And our worship gives us the strength to pick up that cross and follow Jesus out into the world. And as I conclude, I want to say something more about these crosses that were in the slides. For the first few centuries in the church, after Jesus' death and resurrection, the cross was really a public relations problem. For the wider society saw the cross as a tool of execution and torture, a thing of shame. And the Apostle Paul addresses this in 1 Corinthians 1, saying that the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For early Christians, the cross was a symbol of salvation. And when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, execution by crucifixion was actually outlawed because the cross couldn't have that meaning anymore. And instead, the cross became a symbol of victory and even of conquest. And this ornate cross was the cross of the Holy Roman Empire, which ruled Europe for many, many centuries. And this one dates back to the 11th century. This last cross spoke to me for its simplicity and humility. We see the cross through the shape of the paper. This cross is not a blunt instrument, but something that is fragile. When we take up this cross, we see each other and the world through it. We see a world of both brokenness and beauty. We see a world created, loved, and redeemed by God. I had a little cutout of the cross, but I think I've lost it somewhere. So next to you, Chris. Oh, look at that. Thank you. So to take up this cross is to be a follower of Jesus and to lose ourselves in the cross-shaped world. To take up this cross is to offer our lives in love and service, to pray and strive for healing and reconciliation in our communities and in our world. And I will close with a prayer by Charles Henry Brent, who was a missionary bishop in the early 20th century and later a chaplain during World War I. Lord Jesus Christ, you stretched out your arms of love on the hard wood of the cross, that everyone might come within the reach of your saving embrace. So clothe us with your Spirit, that we, reaching forth our hands in love, may bring those who do not know you to the knowledge and love of you, for the honor of your name. Amen.
So thank you, Debbie, for those words this morning. That will give us much to think and pray about in the week and weeks ahead during this Lenten season. And I invite you now to please stand, and we're going to confess our faith in the words of the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, the Father Almighty,